What's up, ChronoCrew Legends? It's your boy Chronos, back with part 5 of What If Deku had Mahoraga's adaptation, and today, Deku's finally letting go of control. The fusion of One for All and Mahoraga isn't just evolving, it's rewriting the way Deku fights, thinks, and feels. Huge shout out to everyone who's been riding with the series since day one. I see the support and I appreciate every single comment, like, and theory you drop. Let's smash that 100 like goal to unlock part 6 and keep this wild ride going. And if you're new, welcome to the timeline. Join the Chrono Crew now. Let's jump in. The morning sun cast long shadows across UA High School's newly constructed dormitory buildings, their modern glass facades gleaming like crystalline monuments to a new era of hero education. Students filtered through the entrance halls with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy, their belongings in tow as they prepared for an unprecedented chapter in their academic journey. Izuku Midoriya stood before the imposing structure designated as Heights Alliance. His adaptation while manifesting briefly behind him, as he processed the emotional significance of this moment. Living on campus represented more than convenience, it was acknowledgement that the world had become too dangerous for heroes in training to return home each evening. Everything has changed since Kamino, he reflected, memories of that catastrophic battle still fresh in his mind. All Might's secret is public knowledge now. The symbol of peace era has ended, and we're the ones who have to fill that void. Deku! Uraraka's cheerful voice broke through his contemplation as she approached with her luggage floating effortlessly beside her. Can you believe we're actually going to be living together? Well, not together, obviously, but you know what I mean. Her enthusiasm was infectious, drawing a genuine smile from Izuku despite the weight of recent events. It's going to be an adjustment, he admitted, watching as other students navigated the entrance procedures. But maybe it's what we need. After everything that's happened. Hey, extras! Bakugo's explosive personality announced his arrival before his physical presence became visible. He shouldered past several students with characteristic disregard for social niceties, though Izuku noticed a subtle difference in his demeanor, less aggressive dismissal and more focused intensity. Quit standing around like tourists. We've got rooms to claim. The comment might have seemed typically abrasive, but Izuku detected underlying concern in Bakugo's tone. Since Kamino, their relationship had evolved in ways neither fully understood yet. Respect had been earned through shared combat, though pride prevented either from acknowledging it directly. Kendo approached their gathering group with characteristic composure, her enlarged hands carrying multiple bags with ease. The room assignments are posted inside, she informed them efficiently. They've organized us by class, with common areas designed to encourage inter-class socialization. Meaning we'll be stuck with each other even more than usual, Todoroki observed as he joined them, his heterochromatic gaze surveying the building with analytical precision. Though given recent security concerns, centralized living arrangements do provide strategic advantages. As they entered the dormitory proper, the scale and sophistication of the facility became apparent. Multiple floors housed individual student rooms alongside communal spaces designed for both relaxation and training. The architecture balanced privacy with security, creating an environment that felt more like a high-end residential complex than institutional housing. This is way nicer than I expected, Kirishima exclaimed, his shark-like grin reflecting genuine excitement. My old room back home could fit in one of these closets. The room assignment process proceeded smoothly, with students scattered across multiple floors based on a system that seemed designed to encourage interaction between different personality types. Izuku found himself assigned to the 4th floor, with Ida and Tokoyami as his immediate neighbors, a pairing that promised both intellectual stimulation and peaceful coexistence. Once basic settling procedures were complete, Ida called for an impromptu class meeting in the main common area. His characteristic formality was slightly relaxed in this new environment, though his natural leadership instincts remained prominently displayed. As class representative, I believe we should establish some ground rules for dormitory life, he announced, adjusting his glasses with precise movements. While we are no longer bound by traditional school hours, we must maintain appropriate standards of conduct and mutual respect. Plus Ultra includes living arrangements too, right? Midoriya suggested. The adaptation will manifesting briefly as he considered the social dynamics involved. We're going to be spending a lot more time together. This could make us stronger as a class, or drive us completely insane, Jaira muttered, though her tone carried more amusement than genuine concern. Actually, Yaoyorozu interjected with diplomatic grace, this presents an excellent opportunity for collaborative training. Many of our quirks could complement each other in ways we haven't fully explored yet. This suggestion sparked immediate interest among the students, with various voices proposing training partnerships and combination techniques. The enthusiasm was palpable, transforming what could have been an awkward adjustment period into genuine excitement for enhanced capabilities. Speaking of training, Aizawa's distinctive voice cut through the chatter as their homeroom teacher appeared in the doorway, his eternally exhausted expression somehow more severe than usual. Tomorrow we begin preparation for the Provisional Hero License exam. Tonight, you rest. Starting tomorrow, you discover exactly how unprepared you currently are. The room fell silent as students absorbed this announcement. The Provisional License exam represented a crucial milestone, legal authorization to use their quirks in public emergencies, effectively marking their transition from students to provisional heroes. The exam is conducted at the Takoba National Stadium. Aizawa continued, his tone carrying the weight of serious preparation. You'll be competing against students from hero schools nationwide, each representing the best their institutions have to offer. UA's reputation makes you targets, expect coordinated opposition from the moment testing begins. Izuku's adaptation wheel spun quietly behind him as he processed this information. After Kamino, his profile within hero society had elevated dramatically. The Divine General epithet had spread through media coverage, making him a recognizable figure beyond UA's walls. They'll come for me specifically, he realized with growing certainty. Other schools will see me as the primary threat to neutralize. Additionally, Aizawa added with something resembling dark satisfaction, you'll need signature moves, techniques that definitively represent your individual fighting styles and capabilities. Generic applications of your quirks won't suffice against serious opposition. As students began dispersing to settle into their new accommodations, excitement mixing with nervous energy about tomorrow's training, Izuku found himself lingering in the common area, contemplating the challenges ahead. The adaptation will manifested more prominently as he considered potential signature techniques. His power had evolved dramatically since receiving One for All, incorporating elements that went far beyond the original quirk's simple strength enhancement. Float, Black Whip, Danger Sense, Smokescreen, FA Gene, each required integration into a cohesive fighting style. And they still don't know about the adaptation itself, he mused, watching the wheel's steady rotation. That's my real edge. Not just the multiple quirks, but the ability to continuously evolve during combat. Deep thoughts, nerd? Bakugo's abrasive tone carried less hostility than usual as he approached, crimson eyes studying the manifested adaptation wheel with barely concealed interest. Just thinking about tomorrow, Izuku replied honestly. About what kind of signature move would actually represent who I am now? Bakugo was quiet for a moment, his expression unusually contemplative. Since Kamino, he'd witnessed Izuku's capabilities firsthand. Not just power, but strategic thinking and protective instincts that went beyond simple quirk application. Whatever you come up with, make it count, Bakugo finally said, his voice carrying grudging respect. Because I'm not losing to anyone except the #1 hero. And if that's going to be you. He paused, jaw-clenching with characteristic stubbornness. Then you better be worthy of it. The following morning arrived with the characteristic intensity of UA's training regimens. Gym Gamma had been transformed into individual training spaces, each designed to accommodate specific quirk requirements while maintaining safety protocols for experimental technique development. Izuku stood in his designated area. The adaptation will fully manifested behind him as he prepared to push his limits further than ever before. 80% One for All, a threshold he'd only touched briefly during extreme combat situations. Today, he would learn to sustain it. 75% is my current sustainable maximum, he reminded himself, feeling the familiar energy of One for All coursing through his pathways. But sustainable isn't the same as possible. If I can adapt to handle 80% even for short periods. He activated full cowling at his established comfort level first, allowing his body to acclimate to the energy distribution. The adaptation will spun steadily, monitoring cellular stress and optimizing energy flow with practiced efficiency. Gradually, Izuku increased the percentage output. 76, 77, 78. Each increment brought increased strain but also provided data for the adaptation wheel to process, developing improved tolerance mechanisms in real time. At 79%, he felt the threshold approaching, the point where sustainable operation gave way to destructive overload. His bones began registering stress fractures, his muscles strained against forces approaching their maximum tolerance. Now, he decided, pushing through to 80% with determined focus. The sensation was extraordinary. Power flowed through him with unprecedented intensity, every movement carrying potential for devastating force. But the adaptation wheel flared brilliantly, working overtime to contain and channel this overwhelming energy safely. For 30 seconds, he maintained 80% output, his enhanced speed allowing him to cross the training area multiple times while his strength left deep impressions in the reinforced equipment. When he finally stepped down to sustainable levels, the adaptation will pulsed with satisfaction. New thresholds achieved and integrated. Across the training area, other students pursued their own signature techniques with varying degrees of success and frustration. Todoroki worked on integrating his fire and ice abilities more seamlessly, creating barriers that incorporated both elements simultaneously. Yaoyorozu experimented with rapid creation sequences that could deploy multiple items in coordinated combinations. But it was Bakugo who drew Izuku's particular attention. The explosive student moved with unprecedented focus, each detonation precisely calculated for maximum impact rather than simple destruction. His movements suggested development of a technique that combined his natural explosiveness with strategic application, something that would distinguish him as more than just raw power. Midoriya. Ida's voice interrupted his observation as the class representative approached with characteristic formality. Your adaptation capabilities continue to evolve at a remarkable rate. Have you given consideration to how this will influence your signature technique development? Actually, yes, Izuku replied, the adaptation wheel spinning thoughtfully behind him. I've been thinking about something that incorporates all aspects of my abilities, not just individual quirks, but the adaptation itself. He gestured toward an unused section of the training area. Would you mind helping me test something? I need someone with your speed to provide a moving target. Ida nodded enthusiastically, always eager to contribute to collaborative training efforts. Of course. What did you have in mind? Something I'm calling Adapt Rush, Izuku explained, moving into position. The idea is to demonstrate continuous adaptation in real time, showing how I can counter multiple different attack patterns within a single engagement. Ida took position at the opposite end of the training space, his engines warming up with characteristic efficiency. Ready when you are. Izuku activated full cowling at 75%, the adaptation wheel expanding dramatically behind him. Engine recipro burst. Ida called, launching himself forward with tremendous speed. What followed was a demonstration of adaptive combat unlike anything their classmates had witnessed before. As Ida approached with linear velocity, Izuku's adaptation wheel processed his movement pattern and developed a counter not through prediction but through real-time analysis and response. He sidestepped the initial charge while simultaneously deploying Black Whip to redirect Ida's momentum, sending the speedster into a controlled trajectory that set up the second phase of the technique. When Ida recovered and attempted a different approach vector, the adaptation wheel had already adjusted, anticipating this tactical shift and preparing an appropriate response. For 3 minutes, they engaged in this dynamic exchange, with Ida providing increasingly complex attack patterns while Izuku demonstrated continuous evolution of his counters. Each exchange showcased different aspects of his abilities: float for three-dimensional mobility, danger sense for predictive awareness, FANFICTION for burst acceleration when needed. When they finally concluded the demonstration, both students were breathing heavily but exhilarated by the results. Izuku's adaptation will pulsed with satisfaction, having integrated multiple new response patterns during the brief engagement. Remarkable, Ida declared, adjusting his glasses with genuine admiration. Your ability to evolve during combat provides tactical advantages that conventional training simply cannot replicate. Around them, other students had paused their own training to observe, expressions ranging from awe to competitive determination. The Divine General's capabilities were becoming increasingly apparent, not just raw power, but strategic depth that could potentially counter any opponent given sufficient adaptation time. Show off, Bakugo muttered from his own training area, though the comment carried more rivalry than resentment. Just wait until you see what I've been working on. As training concluded for the day, students gathered to share progress and offer mutual encouragement. The dormitory environment had already begun fostering closer collaboration between classmates, creating bonds that extended beyond simple academic association. That evening, as students settled into their new rooms, Izuku stood on his balcony overlooking the campus. The adaptation will manifesting quietly in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the provisional license exam would test not just their individual capabilities, but their readiness to assume genuine heroic responsibilities. Whatever comes next, he reflected, watching the wheel's steady rotation, we'll adapt, we'll evolve, and we'll prove that the next generation is worthy of the legacy we've inherited. The Takoba National Stadium loomed against the morning sky like a modern coliseum, its massive structure designed to accommodate the thousands of students who would compete for provisional hero licenses. As Class 1A's bus approached the facility, the scale of the undertaking became apparent. This was no simple exam but a comprehensive evaluation of Japan's future heroes. Izuku gazed through the window at the impressive architecture, the adaptation wheel manifesting briefly behind him as he processed the magnitude of what lay ahead. Hundreds of students from dozens of schools, each representing their institution's finest talents. And according to recent media coverage, many would recognize him specifically. Divine General, huh? Kirishima commented, noticing Izuku's contemplative expression. That's gotta be weird, having a hero name before you even have a license. It's not official, Izuku protested, though he knew the distinction mattered little to public perception. The media just started using it after Kamino. Either way, Kendo observed pragmatically, you'll be a target from the moment we enter that stadium. Other schools will see eliminating you as their highest priority. This assessment proved accurate the moment Class 1A emerged from their bus. Students from various institutions turned immediately toward their group, conversations dropping to whispers as recognition spread through the gathering crowd. That's him, voices carried across the staging area. The adaptation kid from UA, Divine General Midoriya, fought alongside All Might against All for one. If we can eliminate him early, UA loses their biggest advantage. Bakugo moved closer to Izuku's position, his expression darkening at the obvious targeting strategy. Bastards are already coordinating against us, he growled, crimson eyes scanning the other school's formations. Typical coward tactics. It's strategic thinking, Todoroki corrected with clinical objectivity. If their analysis identifies Midoriya as our primary asset, focusing on his elimination makes tactical sense. Let them come, Izuku said quietly, the adaptation will spinning with determined purpose behind him. They're about to learn why adaptation beats preparation. The exam proctor, a professional hero known for his amplified voice quirk, began explaining the parameters as students assembled in the stadium's center. The first phase would be elimination-based, with contestants required to tag opponents using special targets attached to their costumes. Only the first 100 to successfully eliminate 2 opponents would advance to the second phase. Additionally, the proctor announced with theatrical enthusiasm, contestants will face various environmental challenges throughout the testing area. Adaptability and quick thinking are just as important as combat prowess. As students dispersed throughout the expansive testing ground, Izuku found himself immediately separated from his classmates by the crowd dynamics. This isolation was clearly intentional. Other schools had coordinated to prevent UA students from supporting each other during the initial phase. Exactly what I expected, he thought, activating full cowling at 60% to maintain energy efficiency. They want to overwhelm me with numbers before I can adapt to their strategies. The first wave came within minutes of the exam beginning. 6 students from Shiketsu High School approached in coordinated formation, their movements suggesting extensive preparation specifically for this encounter. Divine General Midoriya, their apparent leader, called, his quirk causing his body to shimmer with metallic properties. Nothing personal, but your reputation makes you our priority target. I understand, Izuku replied calmly, the adaptation wheel expanding dramatically behind him. Just don't blame me for what happens next. They attacked simultaneously, a pincer movement designed to overwhelm through multiple approach vectors. But the adaptation wheel had processed their formation during the brief exchange, analyzing movement patterns and identifying optimal counter strategies. Izuku increased his output to 75%, enhanced speed allowing him to intercept the first attacker, while simultaneously deploying Black Whip to redirect 2 others into collision courses with each other. Float activated momentarily, giving him 3-dimensional mobility that their ground-based coordination couldn't account for. Within 30 seconds, 4 of the 6 had been eliminated, their targets successfully tagged through precise applications of enhanced strength and strategic positioning. The remaining 2 attempted to retreat, but danger sense guided Izuku's pursuit, allowing him to tag them before they could escape or signal for backup. 6 eliminations with minimal energy expenditure, he assessed with satisfaction. The adaptation wheel processed their entire strategy and developed perfect counters before they could implement their plan. Around the testing ground, similar encounters were occurring as other schools attempted to overwhelm UA students through coordinated elimination strategies. But Class 1A's training under Aizawa had prepared them for exactly this scenario, fighting against superior numbers while maintaining individual effectiveness. Izuku continued moving through the testing area, encountering and defeating additional groups that had been positioned to ambush him. Each engagement provided new data for the adaptation wheel to process, refining his responses and expanding his tactical repertoire. By the time the first phase concluded, he had eliminated 14 opponents, far exceeding the minimum requirement while demonstrating capabilities that would undoubtedly influence the second phase's parameters. As successful contestants gathered for the transition briefing, Izuku noticed the expressions of other schools' representatives. Initial confidence had given way to concern as they realized their preparation strategies had proven inadequate. The Divine General's reputation had been earned, not merely assigned by media coverage. Phase 2 will test your rescue capabilities. The proctor announced as massive set pieces emerged from the stadium floor. You'll be working in groups to evacuate civilians from a disaster scenario while defending against simulated villain attacks. Success requires coordination, quick thinking, and genuine heroic instincts. The rescue scenario that materialized was extensive, a multi-level urban environment complete with collapsed buildings, trapped civilians, and environmental hazards. Students were assigned to mixed groups from different schools, forcing cooperation between recent opponents. Izuku found himself paired with 3 students from other institutions: a girl with a plant manipulation quirk, a boy whose abilities involved sound amplification, and another whose touch could temporarily enhance others' quirks. Their group was assigned Sector 7, which appeared to have suffered extensive structural damage. I'm Midoriya. He introduced himself as they approached their assignment area. I know we were opponents 30 minutes ago, but now we need to work together to save people. The plant manipulator nodded reluctantly. I'm Ibara from Shiketsu. Despite our earlier disagreement, I recognize the importance of this phase. Their coordination proved remarkably effective once initial hesitation was overcome. Izuku's black whip could access areas conventional rescue equipment couldn't reach, while his float capability allowed him to position trapped civilians for extraction by his teammates' specialized abilities. More importantly, his natural leadership instincts emerged during complex rescue scenarios. When structural collapses threatened civilian safety, he coordinated group responses that maximized their combined capabilities while minimizing risk exposure. The adaptation will operate continuously in the background, processing optimal evacuation routes and civilian handling techniques. Building 7 is showing critical stress indicators, Ibara reported as they completed their 3rd civilian extraction. But there are still people trapped on the upper floors. Izuku activated Danger Sense, extending its range to analyze the building's structural integrity. Multiple civilians remained in immediate danger, with conventional access routes compromised by previous collapses. I can reach them, he decided, increasing his output to 80% for the first time during the exam. But I'll need your support to coordinate safe evacuations. What followed was a masterclass in provisional hero work. Izuku used his enhanced capabilities to access dangerous areas while his teammates provided specialized support. Ibara's plants creating stable evacuation platforms, the sound manipulator directing civilians toward safe zones, and the enhancement specialist boosting their collective effectiveness during critical moments. Their efficiency attracted attention from exam observers and other student groups alike. This was provisional hero work at its finest, coordinated, effective, and genuinely focused on civilian welfare rather than personal advancement. The rescue phase climax arrived when Gang Orca and his sidekicks appeared as simulated villains, adding combat requirements to the ongoing civilian evacuation efforts. The massive whale-themed hero moved with professional efficiency, his presence immediately complicating rescue operations throughout the entire testing area. Maintain rescue priorities, Izuku instructed his team as Gang Orca's sonic attacks disrupted nearby operations. I'll handle direct engagement. He launched himself toward the approaching pro-hero, the adaptation wheel flaring with brilliant intensity as it prepared for combat against a professional opponent. Gang Orca's sonic capabilities were formidable, capable of disorienting opponents while maintaining offensive pressure through his enhanced strength. But the adaptation will process these attack patterns with remarkable efficiency, developing countermeasures that neutralize the disorientation effects while allowing Izuku to engage in close combat. His enhanced speed and strength proved sufficient to match the pro-hero's capabilities, creating tactical openings for continued civilian evacuations. Impressive adaptation, young Midoriya, Gang Orca acknowledged between exchanges. Your reputation is well-deserved. Before Izuku could respond, the confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of additional students, Todoroki and Inesa from Shiketsu High, whose elemental abilities could potentially resolve the situation but whose obvious interpersonal conflict threatened to compromise their effectiveness. Your ice is interfering with my wind currents. Inesa shouted at Todoroki, frustration evident in his voice despite his usually enthusiastic demeanor. And your reckless wind patterns are disrupting my precision applications. Todoroki replied with characteristic coldness, his heterochromatic gaze focused on tactical efficiency rather than collaboration. They're going to make this worse if they keep arguing, Izuku realized, the adaptation wheel spinning as it processed both the tactical situation and the interpersonal dynamics involved. Enough, he called, using One for All to amplify his voice across the battlefield. Both students turned toward him, surprise evident at his commanding tone. Todoroki, Inasa, Izuku continued, landing between them with the adaptation wheel fully manifested behind him. You're both powerful heroes with abilities that could save everyone here. But you're so focused on your personal conflict that you're forgetting why we're here. He gestured toward the ongoing evacuation efforts where civilians continue to depend on their coordinated protection. Those people don't care about your disagreement. They need heroes who can work together, not two individuals who happen to have strong quirks. Real heroes adapt, Izuku stated firmly, the wheel behind him pulsing with determined energy. They adapt to their teammates, to changing situations, and to the needs of the people they protect. So stop arguing and start adapting to each other. The speech had its intended effect. Todoroki's expression shifted from cold dismissal to thoughtful consideration, while Inasa's enthusiasm transformed from frustrated energy into focused determination. You're right, Todoroki acknowledged quietly. Personal conflicts have no place in hero work. Precisely. Inasa exclaimed, his characteristic volume returning but now directed toward positive purpose. Let's show them what coordinated elements can accomplish. What followed was a spectacular demonstration of collaborative hero work. Todoroki's ice created structured barriers and evacuation routes, while Inasa's wind provided mobility assistance and debris management. Izuku coordinated their efforts while maintaining direct engagement with Gang Orca, the adaptation wheel processing multiple variables simultaneously. The combined strategy proved overwhelmingly effective. Within minutes, all remaining civilians had been evacuated to safe zones, while Gang Orca found himself facing coordinated elemental attacks that showcased genuine teamwork rather than individual showboating. Simulation complete. The exam proctor announced as the scenario concluded. All contestants returned to the staging area for evaluation and scoring. As students regrouped following the intensive testing, the atmosphere carried mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. Those who had advanced to the second phase had demonstrated genuine heroic capabilities under pressure, proving their readiness for provisional licensing. The scoring announcement drew intense attention from all participants. Names appeared on massive displays throughout the stadium, ranked according to their comprehensive performance across both phases of examination. When the results were revealed, Izuku's name appeared at the top of the list, highest scores in both elimination efficiency and rescue coordination, with additional recognition for leadership capabilities demonstrated during complex scenarios. Divine General Midoriya, the proctor announced with theatrical enthusiasm. Comprehensive score of 98 out of 100. Exemplary performance in all evaluation categories. The recognition felt surreal. Years ago, he was no one, invisible to hero society and his peers alike. Now he stood as the highest-ranked student in a national examination, acknowledged not just for power, but for the heroic instincts that would define his professional career. Bakugo's name appeared fifth on the list, high enough to earn his license, but clearly rankled by not claiming the top position. His crimson eyes fixed on Izuku with familiar competitive intensity, though respect was evident beneath the surface frustration. As provisional licenses were distributed to successful candidates, Izuku felt the weight of new responsibility settling around him. This wasn't just legal authorization to use his quirk, it was society's recognition of his readiness to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The adaptation wheel manifested quietly behind him as he held the newly issued license, its steady rotation reflecting his commitment to continuous evolution in service of that protection. Whatever comes next, he thought, watching his classmates celebrate their own successes, I'll be ready. Not because I'm the strongest or the fastest, but because I'll adapt to whatever challenges arise. The UA dormitory's training facility hummed with late evening activity as students continued practicing with their newly acquired provisional licenses. The legal authorization to use their quirks in emergency situations had energized everyone, creating an atmosphere of focused determination that extended well past normal training hours. But tension crackled through the air like an impending thunderstorm, centered around two figures facing each other in the facility's main combat area. Izuku stood at one end of the training space, the adaptation wheel manifesting with increasing prominence behind him as he sensed the inevitable confrontation approaching. His provisional license felt heavy in his costume pocket, not from its physical weight, but from the symbolic burden of being recognized as the top-ranked student in a national examination. Bakugo occupied the opposite position, crimson eyes blazing with familiar competitive fire, but underlaid with something deeper, more complex. His own license was secured in his gauntlet compartment, ranking 5th overall, an achievement that would have satisfied any other student but felt like failure to someone accustomed to absolute victory. Deku, Bakugo's voice cut through the facility's ambient noise, carrying an intensity that made nearby students pause their activities. We need to talk. The simple words carried weight that transcended their literal meaning. This wasn't a request for casual conversation. It was a challenge. a demand for resolution to tensions that had been building since their first encounter as children. Kaken, Izuku replied carefully, reading the dangerous undercurrents in his childhood friend's expression. If this is about the exam rankings, shut up, Bakugo interrupted, his palms crackling with small explosions that reflected his internal agitation. This isn't about some stupid test scores. This is about what you've become. What you've been hiding. Other students began retreating from the training area, recognizing the signs of an impending confrontation that went beyond simple sparring. Kirishima hesitated near the exit, clearly torn between loyalty to his friend and understanding that this moment required privacy. Everyone out, Bakugo commanded without taking his eyes off Izuku. Now, the authority in his voice was absolute, born from months of leadership development and genuine concern for civilian safety. Even reluctant observers complied, leaving the two rivals alone in the expansive training facility. Silence stretched between them for long moments, broken only by the facility's environmental systems and the subtle energy discharge from Bakugo's quirk. The adaptation will continue its steady rotation behind Izuku, processing emotional tension alongside potential physical threats. I've been watching you, Bakugo finally said, his voice carrying uncharacteristic quietness. Since the sports festival. Since the internships. Since that clusterfuck at Kamino. He paused, jaw clenching with visible effort. And I don't understand what I'm seeing. Izuku remained silent, recognizing that this was Bakugo's moment to voice whatever had been consuming him since their dynamic began shifting. You are nothing, Bakugo continued, anger bleeding into his tone but controlled rather than explosive. Just an adaptive Deku who only had his puny will behind him, dreaming about being a hero. And then suddenly, he gestured toward the adaptation wheel. Suddenly you're the divine general, ranking first in national exams, fighting alongside All Might against the most dangerous villain in Japan. The adaptation will expanded slightly as Izuku processed the pain underlying Bakugo's words. This wasn't just about competition or rankings, it was about identity, about the fundamental assumptions that had shaped both their lives being completely overturned. So I'm asking you directly, Deku, Bakugo said, his crimson eyes boring into Izuku's green ones with uncomfortable intensity. What the hell actually happened to you? How did you go from bastard to this? The question hung in the air between them, laden with years of complicated history and genuine confusion. Bakugo had built his entire self-concept around being superior to Deku, and that foundation had been systematically demolished over the past year. I can't tell you everything, Izuku replied honestly, feeling the weight of secrets he was bound to protect. But what I can tell you is that I never stopped wanting to be a hero, even when everyone said it was impossible. That's not an answer, Bakugo snarled, explosions crackling larger as his frustration mounted. You think I'm stupid? You think I can't see that you're hiding something major? He took a step forward, his entire posture radiating challenge. Those moves you use, the black tendrils, the floating, that will thing behind you, none of that is normal strength enhancement. And your power level. His voice dropped to something approaching awe despite his anger. I saw you fight all for one. I saw what you could do when you stopped holding back. The adaptation wheel spun faster, processing Bakugo's perceptiveness alongside the emotional complexity of this confrontation. His childhood friend was more observant than most people credited, and his questions were uncomfortably accurate. You want to know what happened? Izuku asked quietly. I met someone who believed in me when no one else did. Someone who saw potential where everyone else saw failure on my quirk. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And when the opportunity came to prove myself, I took it. Whatever the cost. Bullshit, Bakugo spat. You're still dancing around the truth. Fine. His stance shifted into combat readiness, explosions building in his palms with threatening intensity. If you won't tell me, I'll beat it out of you. Kaken, I don't want to fight you. Too bad. Bakugo roared, launching himself forward with explosive propulsion. Because I'm done being left behind. I'm done being second to someone who used to be nothing. His opening attack came with devastating force, a right hook supplemented by explosive power that would have incapacitated most opponents. But the adaptation wheel flared brilliantly, processing Bakugo's combat patterns and developing counters based on months of observation and previous confrontations. Izuku sidestepped the attack while simultaneously deploying Black Whip to redirect Bakugo's momentum, sending him into a controlled trajectory that minimized potential injury while creating distance for de-escalation attempts. I don't want to hurt you, Izuku called, activating full cowling at 50%, enough to defend himself but not sufficient to cause serious damage. Then stop holding back and fight me seriously, Bakugo demanded, recovering with characteristic agility and launching a barrage of explosive attacks that lit up the training facility. Show me what the Divine General can really do. What followed was a battle unlike any the dormitory facility had witnessed. Bakugo fought with desperate intensity, his explosive attacks reaching levels of power that spoke to months of frustrated training and competitive drive. His movements were more refined than during their previous encounters, his strategies more sophisticated, his determination absolutely unwavering. But Izuku's capabilities had evolved dramatically since their last serious confrontation. The adaptation wheel processed Bakugo's every move, developing counters that negated his explosive advantages while exploiting the emotional turmoil that drove his attacks. Float provided three-dimensional mobility that Bakugo's ground-based propulsion couldn't match. Danger Sense anticipated explosive patterns before they fully developed. Black Whip created tactical options that conventional strength enhancement couldn't replicate. As the battle progressed, the gap between their capabilities became increasingly apparent. Bakugo's power had grown significantly, but Izuku's growth had been exponential, not just in raw ability but in tactical sophistication and strategic thinking. "Stop dancing around!" Bakugo screamed, frustration mounting as his attacks consistently failed to connect meaningfully. "Fight me like you mean it." "I am fighting you," Izuku replied, deflecting another explosive barrage while advancing steadily. "But I'm not trying to prove superiority. I'm trying to understand why you're so angry." He increased his output to 70%, enhanced speed, allowing him to close distance despite Bakugo's defensive explosions. "You've gotten stronger, Kaken. Much stronger. But strength isn't just about power, it's about why you use that power. Don't lecture me." Bakugo roared, unleashing his most powerful attack yet, a concentrated explosion that lit up the entire facility and would have leveled lesser structures. But the adaptation wheel had been processing his explosive patterns throughout the battle, developing specific countermeasures for exactly this type of assault. Izuku met the attack directly, channeling 80% one for all through adapted pathways that distributed the enormous energy safely. The collision created a shockwave that reverberated through the building, but when the smoke cleared, Izuku stood unharmed while Bakugo had been driven to one knee by the reactive force of his own attack. "How?" Bakugo whispered, genuine confusion replacing anger as he stared at Izuku's undamaged form. "How are you this strong? How did you leave me so far behind?" The pain in his voice was palpable, not physical discomfort, but the agony of someone whose entire identity had been built on being the strongest, the best, the natural leader. Watching Izuku surpass him so completely had shattered fundamental beliefs about his own worth and potential. Izuku deactivated his quirk, allowing the adaptation wheel to fade as he approached his defeated friend. "You haven't been left behind, Kaken. You've been walking a different path." He knelt beside Bakugo, extending a hand in offer of assistance. "You want to know the truth? I'll tell you. But first, you need to understand something important." Before Bakugo could respond, the training facility's doors burst open as All Might rushed inside, his emaciated form moving with surprising speed despite his weakened condition. Behind him came Aizawa, both teachers having been alerted by the facility's damage sensors. "Young Bakugo, young Midoriya." All Might called, relief evident when he confirmed both students were relatively uninjured. What happened here? The damage to the facility was extensive scorch marks from explosive attacks, impact craters from enhanced strength applications, and clear evidence of a serious confrontation between powerful quirk users. "A misunderstanding," Izuku replied diplomatically, earning a sharp look from Bakugo but maintaining protective discretion about their personal conflict. "A misunderstanding that nearly brought down a building," Aizawa observed dryly, his analytical gaze taking in the destruction patterns. "Both of you, medical check now." As Recovery Girl was summoned to address any potential injuries, Bakugo caught Izuku's arm with unexpected gentleness. "You said you'd tell me the truth," he said quietly, his voice carrying vulnerability rarely displayed. "I need to understand, Deku. I need to know how someone I thought I knew completely became someone I don't recognize at all." All Might's expression grew troubled as he processed the implications of this exchange. The secret of One for All had been carefully guarded, but Bakugo's perceptiveness and his relationship with Izuku made him a unique security risk and potential asset. Perhaps All Might said carefully, "It's time for a more comprehensive discussion about recent developments." The secure conference room deep within UA's administrative section had hosted many sensitive discussions, but few carried the weight of this evening's gathering. All Might sat across from Izuku and Bakugo, his emaciated form somehow commanding despite his weakened physical state, while Aizawa maintained watchful silence from his position near the room's security systems. Bakugo's crimson eyes moved between the adults with barely contained impatience, his recent defeat still stinging but overshadowed by burning curiosity about truths that had been kept from him. The adaptation will manifested faintly behind Izuku, responding to the emotional tension that filled the space. Young Bakugo, All Might began with characteristic gentleness. What I'm about to tell you carries responsibility that extends far beyond personal knowledge. This information could endanger lives if mishandled. I can handle responsibility, Bakugo replied with surprising restraint, his usual explosiveness tempered by genuine concern. What I can't handle is being kept in the dark while Deku risks his life for secrets I don't understand. The pause before Deku spoke volumes about Bakugo's internal struggle to reconcile his childhood perception with the reality of who Izuku had become. The truth is complex, All Might continued, his gaze shifting between both students. It involves history that predates both of you, conflicts that have shaped hero society for generations, and responsibilities that will eventually fall to your generation. He paused, gathering himself for revelations that would fundamentally alter Bakugo's understanding of their world. Young Midoriya was born with a quirk so perfect to partner with. That much you know. What you don't know is that he inherited something far more significant, a power that has been passed down through generations of heroes, each chosen for their potential to wield it responsibly. Bakugo's expression shifted from impatience to genuine shock as the implications began to sink in. Inherited? You mean? One for all, Izuku said quietly, the adaptation will spinning with measured purpose behind him. It's the name of the quirk. All Might passed it to me after determining I had the right spirit to use it properly. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the facility's environmental systems and Bakugo's increasingly rapid breathing as he processed this revelation. You gave him your quirk, Bakugo said slowly, his gaze fixed on All Might with something approaching awe. The symbol of peace is power. You gave it to someone who used to be nothing but an adaptive bastard. Power means nothing without the spirit to use it for protecting others, All Might replied firmly. Young Midoriya demonstrated that spirit long before he received one for all. His actions saved you during the sludge villain incident, remember? He moved to help you when professional heroes hesitated. Bakugo's jaw clenched as that memory surfaced, useless Deku running toward danger to save someone who had tormented him when they were young, driven by nothing but the desire to help. But that's not all, Izuku continued, recognizing that partial truth would be worse than complete disclosure. One for all has been evolving. The previous wielder's quirks are awakening inside me. Float, Black Whip, Danger Sense, and others I haven't fully accessed yet. Bakugo absorbed this information with uncharacteristic quietness, his analytical mind working through the implications and connections. Everything made sense now, the sudden appearance of power, the rapid development, the multiple abilities that shouldn't exist in combination. And at Kamino, Bakugo's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was fighting alongside All Might to protect you and everyone else from All for One, the villain who has been trying to steal one for all for over a century. The weight of these revelations settled over Bakugo like a physical burden. His entire worldview had been constructed around natural talent and personal superiority, but the reality was far more complex. Izuku had been chosen for qualities that transcended simple power. Why? Bakugo asked finally, his voice carrying uncharacteristic vulnerability. Why him and why not someone who was already strong? All Might's smile carried deep warmth despite his weakened condition. Because strength of character matters more than strength of quirk. Young Midoriya possessed the most important quality a hero can have: the absolute determination to save others, regardless of personal cost. Plus, Ultra isn't about being the strongest, Aizawa added quietly from his position. It's about pushing beyond your limits to achieve something greater than yourself. Midoriya embodies that philosophy. Bakugo's hands clenched into fists, but not from anger, from recognition of uncomfortable truths about his own motivations and behavior over the years. I've been an asshole, he said bluntly, his crimson eyes meeting Izuku's green ones with painful honesty. All this time, I thought you were looking down on me, trying to prove you were better, but you were just being yourself. Kakane, let me finish, Bakugo interrupted, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. You could have rubbed it in my face. You could have told everyone that the adaptive kid they mocked was actually stronger than all of them. But you didn't. You protected the secret even when it cost you. The adaptation wheel pulsed gently behind Izuku as he processed the sincerity in Bakugo's words. I couldn't tell anyone because it wasn't just my secret to share. Other people's safety depended on keeping one for all hidden, and I was too caught up in my own pride to see what was really happening, Bakugo admitted, his characteristic explosive personality subdued by genuine self-reflection. I was so focused on being the best that I forgot what being a hero actually means. All Might watched this exchange with satisfaction, not just because sensitive information was being handled responsibly, but because he was witnessing the growth of both students into the heroes they were destined to become. Young Bakugo, he said gently, Your determination to excel is not a flaw. It's what will drive you to become a great hero, just as young Midoriya's protective instincts drive him. Different paths toward the same goal. But will you keep the secret? Izuku asked quietly, understanding that their entire future dynamic depended on Bakugo's answer. Bakugo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the table as he considered the weight of what he'd learned. When he looked up, his expression carried newfound maturity. One for all stays between us, he said firmly. But Deku. He paused, struggling with unfamiliar words. Thank you. For saving me. For protecting everyone. For being the hero I thought I was but wasn't ready to actually be. The adaptation wheel expanded fully behind Izuku, its rotation carrying something approaching joy as it processed this resolution of long-standing conflict. We're going to be rivals, Bakugo continued, his competitive spirit reasserting itself but tempered by respect. I'm still going to surpass you and become the #1 hero. But now I understand what I'm actually competing against. I wouldn't want it any other way. Kaken? Izuku replied with genuine warmth. Their childhood dynamic finally evolving into something healthy and productive. As the meeting concluded and the students prepared to return to their dormitories, All Might felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The next generation of heroes was growing not just in power but in understanding, wisdom, and mutual respect. The morning sun filtered through UA High School's massive windows as students filed into their homeroom classes. The atmosphere carried an unusual tension. Whispers of recent incidents between classes had reached the faculty, prompting immediate administrative action. Principal Nizu stood at the podium in the main auditorium, his small form commanding absolute attention from the gathered student body. His characteristic smile seemed more serious than usual as he adjusted the microphone. Recent events have brought to our attention certain conflicts between students. Nizu began, his voice carrying throughout the packed auditorium. While competitive spirit is encouraged at UA, physical altercations outside of supervised training are strictly prohibited. Izuku shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the adaptation wheel manifesting faintly behind him as he recalled his recent confrontation with Bakugo. Around him, other students exchanged meaningful glances. Everyone knew exactly what incidents had prompted this assembly. They're talking about my fight with Kaken, Izuku thought, guilt weighing heavily on his conscience. I should have found another way to resolve that conflict. Any student found engaging in unauthorized combat will face immediate suspension and potential expulsion. Nizu continued, his tone leaving no room for interpretation. UA produces heroes, not vigilantes who settle disputes through violence. Bakugo sat 2 rows ahead, his posture rigid but lacking his usual explosive energy. Since learning the truth about One for All, their dynamic had shifted dramatically. Rivalry remained, but tempered by genuine respect and understanding. As the assembly concluded and students returned to their classes, the weight of responsibility settled over Class 1A like a heavy blanket. They were no longer just students learning to control their powers, they were future professional heroes whose actions would be scrutinized by society. Class 1A's homeroom felt different as Aizawa entered with 3 unfamiliar students. The trio's presence immediately commanded attention, not through flashy displays of power, but through an aura of absolute confidence that came only from extensive real-world experience. These are UA's Big 3, Aizawa announced with characteristic bluntness. Third-year students who represent the pinnacle of what our educational system can produce. Pay attention, you're looking at your potential future. The first student stepped forward with infectious enthusiasm. His blonde hair caught the morning light as he grinned broadly, his entire demeanor radiating the kind of optimism that could inspire mountains to move. I'm Mirio Togata, he declared, his voice carrying enough energy to power the entire school. Hero name, Lemillion, and I'm going to save 1,000,000 people with a smile. The second member of the trio moved with quiet grace, his indigo hair framing sharp features that suggested analytical intelligence. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured confidence of someone who had faced genuine danger and emerged victorious. Tamaki Amajiki, he said simply. Hero name, Sun Eater? I prefer actions to introductions. The final member commanded attention through sheer presence alone. Her long silver hair flowed like liquid moonlight and her purple eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom beyond her years. Nijire Hato. She introduced herself with bubbly enthusiasm that somehow felt both genuine and mysteriously profound. Hero name, Nijire-chan. I'm super excited to meet UA's famous first years. Izuku studied the trio with keen interest, the adaptation wheel spinning quietly as it analyzed their body language and energy signatures. These weren't just powerful students, they were already operating at near professional levels. They feel different from us, he observed, watching how naturally they carried themselves. like they've already crossed the line from student to hero. Now then, Mirio announced with theatrical flair, how about we show you the difference between upperclassmen and underclassmen? Who wants to fight all three of us at once? The classroom erupted in confused murmurs. Fight the big three? The suggestion seemed simultaneously thrilling and absolutely terrifying. Actually, Mirio continued with a mischievous grin, let's make this more interesting. I'll take on your entire class by myself. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. The training facility's vast space seemed to shrink as Class 1A spread out in combat formation, facing the single blonde student who stood casually in their center. Mirio's relaxed posture contradicted the tactical nightmare they were about to experience. All right, everyone, Mirio called cheerfully. Remember, this is just a demonstration. Try your best, but don't feel bad when it's over. Bakugo was the first to move, explosive propulsion launching him forward with devastating force. Don't get cocky, upperclassmen, he roared, palms crackling with concentrated destructive potential. But Mirio simply smiled and disappeared, not through speed or teleportation, but as if his physical form had suddenly become incorporeal. Bakugo's explosive attack passed harmlessly through empty air, while Mirio rematerialized behind him, landing a gentle but decisive strike that sent the explosive student tumbling. Permeation, Mirio explained casually as chaos erupted around him. I can phase through anything, attacks, defenses, even the ground itself. What followed was a masterclass in advanced quirk application. Mirio moved through their formation like a ghost, appearing and disappearing with perfect timing that rendered conventional tactics useless. Todoroki's ice walls meant nothing when they could be phased through. Ida's speed was irrelevant against an opponent who could become untouchable at will. Within minutes, 17 of the 20 students lay defeated, their attacks having never even threatened their target. Only 3 remained standing, Izuku, Tokoyami, and surprisingly, Sue, whose environmental awareness had allowed her to avoid the worst of Mirio's assault. Ribbit, Sue observed with characteristic directness. Your quirk is really troublesome, Mirio-senpai. Thanks. Mirio replied cheerfully before phasing through the floor and emerging to tap both Sue and Tokoyami simultaneously, eliminating them with gentle efficiency. Now only Izuku remained, the adaptation wheel expanding dramatically behind him as it processed Mirio's phasing ability with unprecedented intensity. The upperclassman's quirk was unlike anything he'd encountered, not just powerful, but conceptually challenging in ways that pushed adaptation to its limits. And then there was one, Mirio said, his grin widening as he studied Izuku's manifested adaptation wheel. The famous Divine General. I've been looking forward to this. Izuku activated full cowling at 70%. Green lightning crackling around his form as he prepared for a fight unlike any he'd experienced. I won't go down as easily as the others, Mirio-senpai. I'm counting on it. Mirio laughed, phasing into the ground and disappearing from view. The battle that followed showcased the absolute pinnacle of student-level hero combat. Mirio's permeation allowed him to attack from impossible angles, emerging from walls, floors, and even the ceiling with perfect unpredictability. But the adaptation wheel worked overtime, analyzing the timing patterns and energy signatures that preceded each manifestation. He has to become solid to attack, Izuku realized during a particularly close exchange. There's a split-second window where he's vulnerable. The adaptation will process this insight, developing timing mechanisms that allowed Izuku to predict Mirio's rematerialization points. His enhanced speed and danger sense combined with these adaptations, creating opportunities for counterattack that shouldn't have existed against such an overwhelming ability. For nearly 3 minutes, they exchanged blows in a display that left their watching classmates speechless. Izuku's continuous adaptation allowed him to gradually close the tactical gap, while Mirio's experience and technical mastery kept him consistently ahead. But as Izuku prepared to increase his output to 80%, a dangerous threshold but one that might tip the balance, Aizawa's capture weapon suddenly wrapped around both combatants. Enough, their homeroom teacher declared firmly. Midoriya, your power output is approaching levels that could damage the facility. This was a demonstration, not a demolition project. Both students stepped back, breathing heavily but exhilarated by the intense exchange. Around them, their classmates stared in awe not just at Mirio's incredible ability, but at Izuku's capacity to adapt and compete against someone operating at near-professional levels. That was amazing, Midoriya, Mirio exclaimed, his enthusiasm undimmed by the interrupted battle. Your adaptation ability is incredible, I've never faced anything like it. The adaptation wheel pulsed with satisfaction behind Izuku as he processed what had just occurred. He hadn't won, but he hadn't been completely overwhelmed either. Against UA's strongest student, he had held his own through pure adaptive evolution. I'm getting stronger, he realized with growing confidence. Not just physically, but tactically. Each fight teaches me something new. The sleek interior of Sir Nitai's hero agency, reflected its founder's meticulous nature. Every surface polished to perfection, every document precisely organized, every detail serving a greater purpose. The man himself sat behind an imposing desk, his sharp features and analytical gaze creating an atmosphere of intimidating professionalism. All Might stood nearby in his deflated form, clearly uncomfortable with the reunion. The tension between former mentor and student was palpable, years of philosophical disagreement hanging in the air like an unspoken challenge. Young Midoriya, All Might said carefully, "I'd like you to meet Sir Night-Eye, my former sidekick and one of Japan's most accomplished heroes." Sir Night-Eye's golden eyes fixed on Izuku with piercing intensity, analyzing every detail of his appearance and demeanor. The adaptation wheel manifested faintly behind Izuku as it responded to the scrutiny, sensing potential threat in the older hero's assessment. "So," Night-Eye said slowly, his voice carrying cold professionalism, "this is the boy you chose to inherit One for All." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Night-Eye's tone suggested deep skepticism about All Might's judgment, questioning not just Izuku's capabilities, but the fundamental wisdom of the decision itself. "I am," Izuku replied with quiet dignity, refusing to be intimidated despite the obvious hostility. "And I intend to prove worthy of that trust." "Prove?" Night-Eye's expression shifted to something approaching amusement, though not the pleasant kind. "Words are easy, young man. Actions require substance." He stood from his desk with fluid grace, his hero costume materializing around him through what appeared to be some form of rapid deployment technology. The efficiency of the transformation spoke to years of professional experience. "If you truly wish to work under me," Night-Eye continued, "you'll need to demonstrate that you possess more than just inherited power. You'll need to show intelligence, adaptability, and the capacity to surprise even someone who specializes in predicting the future." "He can see the future?" Izuku thought, the adaptation wheel spinning with increased intensity as it processed this new information. "That explains his confidence. He already knows how this fight will end." "The challenge is simple," Night-Eye announced, gesturing toward an open area of the office. "Land one hit on me within 3 minutes. If you succeed, I'll consider taking you as an intern. If you fail..." He paused meaningfully. Then perhaps All Might's judgment isn't as sound as he believes. All Might opened his mouth to protest, but Izuku stepped forward before his mentor could intervene. "I accept." The adaptation wheel expanded dramatically behind him as he activated full cowling at 60%, a conservative start, but one that would allow for tactical escalation as the fight progressed. "Foresight," Night-Eye announced calmly, touching Izuku's shoulder with casual ease. The contact lasted only a moment, but Izuku felt something profound occur, as if his immediate future had been read like an open book. Night-Eye's expression shifted to one of confident satisfaction as he stepped back. "I've seen the next minute of your actions," Night-Eye explained with clinical detachment. "Every movement, every decision, every adaptation your unusual ability will attempt. You cannot surprise someone who has already witnessed your future." "He's seen what I'm going to do," Izuku realized, understanding the true scope of the challenge he'd accepted. But the adaptation wheel doesn't follow predetermined patterns. It evolves in real-time based on changing circumstances. The battle began with explosive intensity. Night-Eye moved with superhuman speed and precision, his every action perfectly calculated to counter Izuku's intended responses. It was like fighting someone who knew exactly where he would be before he knew it himself. Izuku attempted to use Black Whip to create unpredictable attack vectors, but Night-Eye had already positioned himself to avoid the tendrils before they fully manifested. Float provided no advantage when his opponent had seen exactly how he would utilize three-dimensional mobility. For the first minute, Izuku failed to land even a glancing blow. Night-Eye's predictions were absolute, his movements economical and devastating in their efficiency. It seemed impossible to surprise someone who had already witnessed the future, but as the second minute began, something unusual occurred. The adaptation wheel's rotation accelerated beyond anything Izuku had experienced before, its processing power focused not on physical evolution but on temporal analysis. It was adapting to the very concept of precognition. "His predictions are based on observing my future actions," Izuku reasoned, the wheel spinning with brilliant intensity. "But what if my actions change after he's already seen them?" The adaptation wheel began developing something unprecedented: mid-action modification protocols. Instead of following through with planned movements, Izuku started altering his attacks halfway through their execution, creating futures that diverged from what Night-Eye had observed. "Impossible," Night-Eye muttered as Izuku's punch suddenly shifted trajectory in the middle of its arc, forcing him to adjust his dodge pattern. "You're changing your future mid-execution." "I'm not changing the future," Izuku replied, increasing his output to 75% as the adaptation wheel reached peak intensity. I'm adapting faster than your predictions can process. What followed was a display of evolutionary combat that defied conventional understanding. Izuku's movements became increasingly unpredictable as the adaptation will learn to modify actions in real time, creating scenarios that existed outside of Naitai's observed timeline. With 15 seconds remaining, Izuku made his decisive move. He activated Float while simultaneously deploying Black Whip in a pattern that would have been suicidal. Except the adaptation will had calculated the exact modifications needed to transform failure into success. The attack came from an angle that Naitai's future sight hadn't anticipated because it hadn't existed when the observation was made. Izuku's fist connected with Naitai's shoulder with precisely enough force to fulfill the challenge conditions without causing injury. 53 seconds, All Might announced, checking his watch with barely concealed pride. Young Midoriya, you've just accomplished something that shouldn't be possible. Night-Eye stood in stunned silence, his analytical mind struggling to process what had occurred. Someone had successfully surprised a precognitive hero through pure adaptive evolution, a feat that challenged his fundamental understanding of how predictions and reality interacted. Your adaptation ability, Night-Eye said slowly, it's not just physical enhancement. It's conceptual evolution in real time. Something like that, Izuku replied, the adaptation will gradually slowing its rotation as the immediate challenge passed. I don't fully understand it myself, but it seems to develop solutions to whatever problem I'm facing. Night-Eye was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying Izuku with newfound respect. When he finally spoke, his voice carried grudging acknowledgement of capabilities that transcended his initial assessment. Very well, he said formally. Sir Night-Eye Agency will accept you for work-study placement. But understand this, the villains we face operate on a level far beyond school exercises. Your adaptation ability will be tested in ways that make this challenge seem trivial. The streets of Muzurufa carried their usual daytime energy as Izuku walked alongside Mirio during their first official patrol together. Both wore their hero costumes, the weight of provisional licenses giving their presence legitimate authority that still felt surreal after months of purely academic training. Patrolling is mostly observation, Mirio explained cheerfully as they moved through the commercial district. We're looking for signs of trouble before it becomes crisis level. Prevention is always better than reaction. Izuku nodded, the adaptation will manifesting faintly as it processed the sensory data from their urban environment. His enhanced hearing picked up dozens of conversations. His improved vision caught movement patterns that suggested normal civilian activity, and danger sense remained blissfully quiet. Mirio-senpai, Izuku said thoughtfully, how do you maintain such optimism? After everything you've seen as a hero. Mirio's grin softened into something more genuine. Because every person we save, every crisis we prevent, every child who sleeps safely because heroes exist, that's why we do this. The darkness is real, but so is the light we bring to fight it. Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the sound of raised voices from a nearby alley. Both heroes immediately shifted into alert mode, their casual conversation replaced by professional focus as they approached the disturbance. What they found made Izuku's blood run cold. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, sat against the alley wall with tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. Her clothes were torn and bloodied, her arms showing signs of recent injury that spoke to systematic abuse rather than accidental harm. But it was her eyes that truly disturbed him. Ancient, haunted, carrying trauma that no child should ever experience. She looked up at their approach with the desperate hope of someone who had been failed by too many adults to trust easily. Hey there, Mirio said gently, kneeling down to her level with his characteristic warmth. Are you okay? Are you hurt? The girl flinched away from his outstretched hand, her entire body language screaming of conditioning that associated adult contact with pain. Fresh tears began flowing as she struggled to form words. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't take me back to him. Izuku thought. The adaptation will spinning with protective urgency as his hero instincts screamed that this child was in immediate danger. Someone has been hurting her systematically. Someone she's afraid will take her back. Every fiber of his being demanded immediate action. His fists clenched as one for all energy began circulating through his system, preparing for confrontation with whoever had caused this suffering. The adaptation will expanded, ready to process combat data for what would undoubtedly be a righteous battle. But Mirio's hand on his shoulder stopped him before he could act. Midoriya, his senpai said quietly, his voice carrying warning despite his maintained smile. We need to think carefully about this situation. Think, Izuku demanded, struggling to keep his voice low enough to avoid frightening the girl further. Look at her. Someone has been torturing a child. We have to follow proper procedures, Mirio interrupted firmly. If we act recklessly, we could make things worse for her. The restraint felt like torture. Every instinct Izuku possessed as both a hero and a human being demanded immediate intervention, but Mirio's experience carried weight that couldn't be ignored. Still, looking at the girl's terrified face made inaction feel like complicity. There has to be something we can do, he thought desperately. We can't just leave her like this. Listen, Mirio said gently to the girl, we're heroes. We want to help you, but we need to do it the right way. Can you tell us your name? Eri, she whispered, the single word carrying more pain than should be possible from someone so young. Eri, Mirio repeated warmly. That's a beautiful name. Eri, we're gonna make sure you're safe, okay? But first, we need to talk to some other heroes who know exactly how to help you. Before either hero could continue the conversation, a figure emerged from the alley's shadows. The man who appeared wore expensive clothing and a plague mask that concealed his features, but his entire presence radiated the kind of authority that came from absolute control over others. Eri, the masked man said calmly, his voice carrying subtle threat despite its conversational tone. You've wandered off again. How many times have I told you not to leave without permission? The girl's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear entirely, her small frame shaking with terror that spoke to deep conditioning. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. The repetition was mechanical, learned through repetition that suggested systematic psychological abuse. Izuku felt his control slipping as one for all energy surged through his system unbidden, the adaptation wheel expanding with protective rage. And you are, the masked man inquired politely, his attention shifting to the two heroes with calculating assessment. Lemillion, Mirio replied, his cheerful demeanor maintained despite the obvious tension. This is Deku. We're heroes on patrol, just making sure everyone is safe. How considerate, the man said, his tone suggesting amusement rather than gratitude. But as you can see, everything is fine here. Eri is my daughter, and she has a tendency to wander when she's not properly supervised. Daughter? Izuku's mind reeled at the obvious lie. That's not a father-daughter relationship. That's a predator and his victim. The adaptation wheel spun with increasing intensity as it processed the man's body language, vocal patterns, and the girl's terrified response to his presence. Every data point suggested extreme danger to the child, yet Mirio remained diplomatically neutral. Of course, Mirio said easily. Family matters can be challenging. We just wanted to make sure she wasn't lost or in any danger. Your concern is noted, the masked man replied, extending his hand toward Eri. Come along, dear. We have important work to return to. Eri's terrified eyes met Izuku's for a brief moment, and in that instant, he saw a desperate plea for help that cut through his soul like a blade. She was begging him silently, hopelessly, to save her from whatever nightmare she was being returned to. But Mirio's grip on his shoulder tightened, preventing the rescue attempt that every fiber of his being demanded. They watched in helpless frustration as the girl took the man's hand with trembling resignation, her spirit visibly breaking as she accepted her fate. Have a pleasant afternoon, heroes, the masked man said politely before leading Eri deeper into the alley and out of their sight. The moment they disappeared, Izuku spun toward Mirio with barely contained fury. Why did you stop me? He demanded. That girl was being abused. We could have saved her. And then what? Mirio asked seriously, his characteristic optimism tempered by harsh reality. We attack a man with no evidence of wrongdoing? We kidnap a child from her legal guardian? We destroy any chance of building a case that could actually help her. The logic was sound but felt like betrayal. She was terrified of him. Yes, Mirio agreed sadly. And now we know that. We know her name, we know her appearance, and we have evidence of suspicious circumstances. That's information Night Eye can use to investigate properly. Investigate, Izuku thought bitterly. While that girl suffers for however long it takes to gather evidence. But as they made their way back to the agency, Izuku forced himself to acknowledge the wisdom in Mirio's restraint. Rash action might have saved Eri temporarily while ultimately making things worse. Destroying evidence, alerting potential conspirators, or simply pushing the abuse underground where heroes couldn't reach. Still, the image of her terrified eyes would haunt him until they found a way to help her properly. The conference room at Night Eye Agency buzzed with intense activity as heroes and police officials gathered around detailed investigation materials. Wall-mounted displays showed photographs, organizational charts, and surveillance footage that painted a disturbing picture of coordinated criminal activity. Sir Night Eye stood at the center of it all, his analytical mind processing connections that others might miss. His golden eyes moved between the assembled evidence with calculating precision, building a case that would justify the response he was planning. "The man you encountered is Kai Chisaki," Night Eye announced, pointing to a photograph of the masked figure. "Street name, Overhaul. Leader of the Shai Hasaikai, a Yakuza organization that has recently emerged as a significant threat to public safety." Izuka studied the displayed information with growing horror. The organization's activities included human trafficking, illegal quirk experimentation, and the production of unknown substances that police suspected were related to quirk enhancement or suppression. "The girl, Eri," Night Eye continued, "is believed to be central to their operations, though her exact role remains unclear. What we do know is that she rarely appears in public, and when she does, she shows clear signs of systematic abuse." The adaptation wheel manifested behind Izuku as he processed the implications. Eri wasn't just being hurt, she was being used for something that required keeping her alive but terrified, controlled through trauma that ensured compliance. "What kind of experiments?" Mirio asked, his usual cheerfulness replaced by grim determination. "Intelligence suggests they're developing substances that can permanently destroy or enhance quirks," a police official replied. "If true, the implications for hero society would be catastrophic." "They're using her quirks somehow," Izuku realized, the adaptation wheel spinning as it analyzed the available data. "She's not just a victim, she's a weapon they're forcing to cooperate through abuse." "Which brings us to our current situation," Night Eye said, activating a holographic display that showed the Shai Hasaikai compound's layout. "We have sufficient evidence to justify a coordinated raid, but the operation's complexity requires careful planning and overwhelming force." The building schematic was intimidating: multiple levels, numerous potential hostage locations, and defensive positions that could turn any assault into a prolonged siege. If Eri was being held inside, her safety would depend on speed and precision. "The raid will involve multiple hero agencies and police units," Night Eye continued. "Pro heroes will handle the primary assault while students provide support and evacuation assistance. This is not a training exercise. It's a real operation against dangerous criminals." Izuku felt his heart rate accelerate as the magnitude of what they were planning became clear. This would be his first real raid, his first genuine test as a provisional hero against opponents who wouldn't hesitate to kill if cornered. "Midoriya," Night Eye said, his attention focusing on the young hero. "Your adaptation ability makes you particularly valuable for this operation. Unknown quirks and unexpected circumstances are likely. Your capacity to evolve during combat could be decisive." The weight of responsibility settled over Izuku like a heavy cloak. Eri's safety might depend on his ability to adapt quickly enough to overcome whatever defenses the Shai Hasaikai had prepared. "I won't fail," he thought with determination. "Whatever it takes, I'll save her." The Shai Hasaikai compound loomed against the dawn sky like a fortress of corruption, its traditional architecture hiding modern security systems and criminal intent. Heroes assembled in coordinated teams around the perimeter, their professional demeanor masking the tension that preceded any major operation. Izuku crouched beside Mirio and Tamaki, the adaptation wheel manifesting as his enhanced senses analyzed the compound's defensive positions. Multiple guards, electronic surveillance, and what appeared to be quirk-based detection systems created layers of protection that spoke to serious criminal organization. "Remember," Sir Nightai's voice crackled through their communication devices, "our primary objective is rescuing the girl and gathering evidence of their criminal activities. Secondary objectives include apprehending key personnel and dismantling their operational capacity." Around the compound, other hero teams reported their readiness. Fat Gum's team positioned near the loading docks, Ryukyu's group covering the rear entrances, and numerous police units creating an impenetrable perimeter that would prevent escape. "All teams execute on my mark," Night Eye commanded. 3, 2, 1. Go! The assault began with overwhelming force. Ryukyu's dragon form smashed through reinforced barriers while Fat Gum's team breached the main entrance with explosive efficiency. But it was Mirio's permeation that allowed the deepest penetration, phasing through walls to reach interior positions before defenders could organize effective resistance. Izuku followed close behind, the adaptation wheel expanding as it processed the chaotic combat environment. Yakuza members emerged from defensive positions with various quirks. Some enhanced their physical capabilities, others manipulated the environment itself, and a few demonstrated abilities that defied easy categorization. But none of them were prepared for an opponent whose capabilities evolved during combat. The first defender launched crystalline projectiles that should have been impossible to avoid in the narrow corridor. But the adaptation will process their trajectory and composition, developing movement patterns that transformed lethal attacks into minor obstacles. The second opponent attempted to manipulate gravity around Izuku's position, expecting to crush him against the walls through overwhelming force. Instead, the adaptation will analyze the gravitational field and developed countermeasures that allowed him to move normally despite the altered physics. Within minutes, Izuku had advanced deeper into the compound than conventional tactics should have allowed, his continuous evolution overwhelming defenders who had planned for predictable hero responses. The basement levels, Mirio's voice crackled through the comm system. I found laboratories, medical equipment, containment cells, and what looks like, oh no. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving ominous silence that made Izuku's blood run cold. If Mirio had found something that shocked him into speechlessness, the situation was worse than anyone had anticipated. I have to reach him, Izuku thought, increasing his output to 75% as he blasted through opposition with growing urgency. And I have to find Eri before something happens to her. The compound's upper levels had transformed into a battlefield where Tamaki Amajiki faced 3 of the Shai Hasaikai's elite operatives. His usual anxious demeanor had given way to focused determination as he utilized his manifest quirk with devastating effectiveness. "You heroes think you understand us?" snarled one of the criminals, his body morphing into crystalline armor that gleamed with deadly edges. "But you have no idea what we're truly capable of." Tamaki didn't respond with words, his answer came through action. Octopus tentacles erupted from his arms while his legs transformed into powerful hooves, the combination of sea creature agility and mammalian strength creating a fighting style that defied conventional understanding. He consumed takoyaki and beef before the mission, one operative observed with growing alarm. But how is he manifesting multiple animal characteristics simultaneously? The answer lay in Tamaki's understanding of his own quirk's deeper potential. Rather than manifesting single characteristics, he had learned to combine multiple consumed properties into hybrid forms that maximized their tactical advantages. When the crystalline opponent attacked with razor-sharp projectiles, Tamaki manifested clamshell armor that deflected the assault while simultaneously growing chicken wings for aerial mobility. The contradiction between defensive protection and offensive flight created tactical options that his opponents couldn't predict. "I won't let them hurt anyone else," Tamaki thought as he pressed his attack. "These people, what they've done to that little girl, it's unforgivable." His shy nature had been replaced by righteous fury that transformed his combat effectiveness. The criminals who had expected to overwhelm a nervous student found themselves facing someone operating at near-professional levels. Deep within the compound's laboratory levels, Mirio faced Overhaul in a sterile chamber that reeked of chemical experimentation. Medical equipment lined the walls alongside containment systems that spoke to prolonged human testing. And in the center of it all, Eri cowered behind a surgical table, her small form shaking with terror as she watched the confrontation unfold. "You heroes are all the same," Overhaul said calmly, his gloved hands radiating the destructive potential that had earned his reputation. "You think you understand justice, but you're nothing more than obstacles to true progress." "Progress?" Mirio demanded, his characteristic cheerfulness replaced by disgusted anger. "You call torturing a child progress?" "That child," Overhaul replied, "possesses the power to revolutionize hero society. Her quirk can rewind biological states, including the permanent erasure of other quirks. Imagine a world where true equality is possible, where the accident of genetic enhancement no longer determines social hierarchy." The implications were staggering. Eri's power could indeed reshape society, but only through systematic abuse that reduced her to a living weapon. "She's not a tool," Mirio shouted, launching himself forward with desperate fury. "She's a little girl who deserves to be protected, not tortured." The battle that followed showcased the absolute pinnacle of student-level hero combat. Mirio's permeation allowed him to phase through Overhaul's devastating attacks while delivering precise strikes that gradually overwhelmed the villain's defenses. But as victory seemed within reach, one of Overhaul's subordinates appeared with a specialized weapon. A gun loaded with bullets that contained Ares' processed blood. "Quirk-erasing bullets," the subordinate announced with malicious satisfaction. "Even if they don't kill you, they'll make you permanently quirkless." The weapon aimed not at Mirio, but at Izuku, who had just arrived at the laboratory entrance. Time seemed to slow as Mirio realized what was about to happen. His underclassman was about to lose his inherited power to protect a girl they'd come to save. "I won't let that happen," Mirio thought with absolute certainty. "I'll save 1,000,000 people with a smile, starting with him." He threw himself into the bullet's path, his permeation failing to activate in time as the specialized ammunition struck his torso. The effect was immediate and devastating, not just the physical impact, but the sensation of his quirk being systematically erased from his very being. "Mirio-senpai!" Izuku screamed as his mentor collapsed. The adaptation will expanding to massive proportions as it processed what had just occurred. But even as Mirio fell, his characteristic smile remained intact. "Don't worry, Midoriya," he said weakly. A hero's strength doesn't come from their quirk alone. Rage, unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced, flooded through his system as he watched Mirio collapse. The adaptation wheel blazed with unprecedented intensity, its rotation becoming almost blinding as it processed not just the tactical situation but the pure injustice of what had occurred. "You monster," Izuku snarled, his voice carrying deadly promise as one for all energy surged through his pathways. "How dare you hurt him? How dare you hurt her?" Overhaul studied this new development with clinical interest, his analytical mind noting the dramatic change in the young hero's demeanor and power output. "Interesting," he observed calmly. The famous divine general finally showing his true capabilities. But rage makes heroes sloppy. You'll be easier to dissect when you're angry. The villain's hands touched the laboratory floor, his quirk activating with devastating effect. The entire chamber began reshaping itself, walls became spikes, floors transformed into crushing mechanisms, and the ceiling developed projectile launchers that turned the space into a death trap. But Izuku was beyond caring about conventional tactics. He activated full cowling at 80% past his established safe threshold while the adaptation wheel worked overtime to contain and channel the overwhelming power. What followed was a battle that redefined what student-level heroes were capable of achieving. Izuku moved through Overhaul's environmental attacks like they were minor obstacles, the adaptation wheel processing each transformation and developing countermeasures in real time. Spikes that should have impaled him were shattered by precise strikes. Crushing mechanisms found their intended victim had already adapted to predict and avoid their activation. "Impossible," Overhaul muttered as his most devastating attacks failed to even slow his opponent. "You're adapting faster than I can modify the environment." "I don't just adapt to attacks," Izuku replied grimly, increasing his output further as he closed distance. "I adapt to you." The adaptation wheel had been analyzing not just Overhaul's powers, but his tactical thinking, psychological patterns, and strategic preferences. Each attack revealed more data, allowing Izuku to predict not just what the villain would do next, but how he would think about doing it. When Overhaul attempted to decompose the air around Izuku's position, the adaptation wheel had already developed respiratory modifications that allowed function in altered atmospheric conditions. When the villain tried to reshape matter at the molecular level, Izuku's evolved form simply ignored effects that should have been universally applicable. But as the battle reached its climax, Izuku realized that defeating Overhaul wasn't enough. Eri remained terrified and traumatized, her quirk still being used against her will. The true victory would require not just stopping the villain, but saving the girl. "Eri," he called gently, even as he continued evading Overhaul's increasingly desperate attacks. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me." The girl's haunted eyes met his through the chaos of battle, searching for some reason to believe that this time would be different. She's been betrayed by every adult she's ever known, Izuku realized. Why should she trust me? The answer came not through words, but through action. As Overhaul launched his most devastating attack yet, a complete molecular reconstruction of the laboratory that should have been impossible to survive, Izuku threw himself between the assault and Eri's position. The adaptation will expanded to its maximum manifestation, blazing with protective fury as it worked to contain forces that challenged the very concepts of biological possibility. Izuku's body underwent rapid modifications that pushed adaptation beyond anything he'd experienced, cellular restructuring that allowed survival in conditions that should have meant instant death. When the attack concluded and the devastation cleared, Izuku remained standing, his form crackling with residual energy as the adaptation wheel slowly returned to normal rotation. Behind him, Eri stared in wonder at someone who had risked everything to protect her. You saved me," she whispered, the first words she'd spoken that weren't flavored with terror. "That's what heroes do," Izuku replied gently, extending his hand toward her. "We protect people who can't protect themselves." This time, when she reached for his hand, it was with hope rather than resignation. With Eri's small hand clasped in his own, Izuku felt something extraordinary occur. Her quirk, the power that had been used to torment her for so long, began flowing through their connection, but this time under her control rather than Overhaul's forced extraction. The sensation was unlike anything in his experience. Where One for All brought power through accumulated energy, Eri's ability brought restoration through temporal reversion. His accumulated injuries began healing at supernatural rates, while his energy reserves replenished themselves continuously. "What is this?" Overhaul demanded, his clinical composure finally cracking as he witnessed something outside his understanding. The girl's power doesn't work that way, but the adaptation wheel was processing their connection with brilliant intensity, developing protocols that allowed Izuku to utilize Eri's rewinding ability without being completely reverted to a previous state. Instead of undoing his growth, her power was restoring his condition while preserving his development. "I can use One for All at full power," Izuku realized with growing excitement. With Aries' healing supporting me, I don't have to worry about self-destruction. Aerie, he said gently, I'm going to use a lot of power to stop the bad man. Can you help me stay strong while I do it? She nodded with determined courage that belied her young age. I want to help. I want him to stop hurting people. The trust in her voice was absolute. A child who had been betrayed by every adult in her life choosing to believe in a hero who had proven worthy of that faith. Izuku activated One for All at 100%. The sensation was indescribable. Power flowed through his system at levels that would normally destroy human biology, but Aries' continuous healing prevented the catastrophic damage while the adaptation wheel processed and contained the overwhelming energy. Impossible! Overhaul screamed, his entire form beginning to mutate as he desperately combined with his subordinates to increase his power. I am the pinnacle of evolution. I cannot be defeated by a child. But evolution wasn't about individual superiority. It was about adaptation, growth, and the strength that came from protecting others. Izuku had evolved beyond physical enhancement into something that embodied the very concept of heroic progress. The final exchange lasted only seconds but felt like an eternity. Overhaul's ultimate form, a massive fusion of organic and mechanical components, launched an attack that should have leveled several city blocks. Izuku met it head-on with a punch that carried not just the accumulated power of One for All's previous wielders, but the protective fury of someone who had witnessed too much injustice and refused to allow it to continue. Smash! He roared, the sound carrying across the entire compound as his fist connected with Overhaul's ultimate attack. The collision created a shockwave that could be felt kilometers away, but when the dust settled, only one figure remained standing. Overhaul lay defeated among the rubble of his own making, his monstrous form reverting to merely human proportions as consciousness fled. Izuku looked down at Aerie, who was smiling for what might have been the first time in her young life. The adaptation wheel pulsed gently behind him, its rotation calm and satisfied as it processed the successful rescue. Is it over? She asked quietly. It's over, Izuku confirmed, his voice carrying absolute certainty. You're safe now. You're going to stay safe. The medical bay at UA High School buzzed with quiet activity as heroes recovered from the Shai Hasaikai raid. Most injuries were minor, but the psychological impact of what they'd witnessed would take longer to heal than physical wounds. Izuku sat beside Mirio's bed, the adaptation wheel manifesting faintly as he processed the sight of his mentor connected to various monitoring devices. The quirk erasing bullet had done its work completely. Mirio was now permanently quirkless. His hero career effectively ended before it had properly begun. Stop looking so guilty, Mirio said cheerfully, his smile as bright as ever despite everything that had happened. You saved that little girl and stopped a criminal organization. That's worth celebrating, but your quirk will grow back eventually, Mirio interrupted with characteristic optimism. Aries' power can rewind biological states, remember? Once she learns to control it properly, she might be able to help me. And even if not, he shrugged. A hero's strength doesn't come from their quirk alone. Across the medical bay, Aries slept peacefully under Recovery Girl's care, her small form finally relaxed after months of systematic trauma. The sight of her peaceful rest brought warmth to Izuku's heart. Whatever the cost, seeing her safe made every sacrifice worthwhile. The Shai Hasaikai has been completely dismantled, Sir Night Eye reported as he entered the medical bay. Their research data has been secured, their criminal network exposed, and their leadership imprisoned. The immediate threat is over. But Izuku could see something troubling in Night Eye's expression, a weight that spoke to information not yet shared. What aren't you telling us? He asked quietly. Night Eye was silent for a moment, his analytical mind weighing how much truth his students could handle. When he spoke, his voice carried the gravity of someone delivering life-altering news. The League of Villains has made contact with the remaining Shai Hasaikai resources, he said carefully. They're planning something significant, an operation that could destabilize Hero Society itself. It's not over, Izuku realized. The adaptation will spinning with anticipatory purpose. This was just the beginning. Additionally, Night Eye continued, my quirk has shown me glimpses of a future that concerns me greatly. Dark times are coming, young heroes. Times that will test everything you believe about heroism and justice. The prediction hung in the air like a storm cloud, promising challenges that would make the Shai Hasaikai raid seem simple by comparison. But as Izuku looked around the medical bay, at Mirio's unshakable optimism, at Aries' peaceful sleep, at his classmates who had proven themselves capable of genuine heroism, he felt not fear but determination. Whatever comes next, he thought, the adaptation wheel pulsing with quiet confidence, we'll face it together. We'll adapt, we'll grow, and we'll prove that the next generation is ready for whatever challenges await. Through the medical bay windows, the sun was setting over Mizutofu, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that spoke to endings and beginnings in equal measure. The Shai Hasaikai chapter had concluded, but the story of the Divine General was just beginning. Plus Ultra, Izuku thought, watching Aries' sleeping form with protective determination. Always Plus Ultra. The adaptation will spun quietly behind him, already preparing for whatever evolution would be required next. Yo, what did we just witness? Deku's no longer adapting to survive, he's adapting to dominate. And if that ending was any hint, the next battle's going to break more than just bones. You already know what to do. Like, subscribe and drop your craziest theories in the comments, because I might just use one in the next part. ChronoCrew, you're not just viewers, you're the pulse of this timeline. I'll catch y'all in part 6. Stay sharp.